I think that should work. I can bring guests on, and my waist is below the line. Hopefully, we got that on tape.
So, Ed, are you recording?
All right. I think we're on. All right. Well, hey, it's working. We are on YouTube.
Oh.
Make sure everything's. Can you guys hear me? Is everybody sounding? Are we hearing it on YouTube? Hello, just testing. Everyone hear us? Hello. Is it going through to YouTube? Oh no, that's. Hello. All right. Yeah, slight delay. All right, great. All right. Hey, this is our first time doing all this stuff, so please forgive any technical snafus here. We're all working our way through our very first time here. All right, so hey,
we're gonna wade through nectarines.
Hey, this is the very first
Muppet Show that had something about nectarines, if I remember correctly.
So we are live on YouTube, guys, and this is getting recorded on YouTube. So mind what you say.
I know. That's why I'm speaking nectarines.
We are in public. We are on the street corner now. All right, very good. This is our very first Goddess Bible study. I want to thank Lisa and Tony G from the Woodlock Refuge for joining me. I am Ed Dodge. I am the author of this book, A History of the Goddess, from the Ice Age to the Bible, which is sort of the starting point of my journey into the divorce of the Mother Goddess in the Bible. I'm mainly actually going to focus in terms of material for this podcast. I started writing another book, and I have like a whole 250-page outline already done with all the research and already complete. But then I quit writing and gave my book contract back and never finished it. So I've got all this content that's an update to that book that's better than that book. So that's what I want to focus on over the course of the podcast. But today, let's start with little introductions. Let's say hi, Lisa. Maybe you can say hi and introduce yourself, since you guys don't know each other.
Yeah. Hi. My name is Lisa. I am a high priestess. I have been a high priestess for close to 30 years now. I'm also an actual minister, an ordained minister, and I practice all the mystical and magical arts. I have a degree from James Madison University in religion and women's studies. So I like to tell people I majored in the goddess.
And I met Lisa recently through a mutual friend, her cousin, our friend Kat, who's a really fantastic artist, and she introduced us. Lisa, we all live in Virginia. There's a Virginia-based, Northern Virginia, Western Virginia-based group here right now, but we're doing it online, so hopefully more people will catch up to us here at some point. But we're starting a nice, organic, slow, one little seed at a time. So maybe Tony, you can introduce yourself. You got a little story for yourself too. Oh, you're frozen up, Tony.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad to be here.
His camera went dark.
What's that?
Your camera went dark.
Let me just see.
Mercury is Gatorade after all.
Can you hear me still?
We can still hear you.
Here you are.
Now you're back. Now you're back.
Hello. How'd that work?
Better.
Can you hear and see me now?
Yep, we see you now.
All right. Well, hello Ed and hello Lisa, and I saw that we have and I like to go by my alter ego of the Bard you see, here to sing your epic tales of triumph over tragedy and announce your awesome accolades with pomp and pageantry. And when I met Ed and learned about the book, all I could do was sing his praises on stages. especially how it kind of resonated with some of my own soul journey over the last 49 years and the relationships I've had with women from mothers and my adopted mother and ex-wife and mother to my daughters and my friends, and to seeing what's happening in business with women in roles, and how those dynamics work with power and control, and so it was always been deeply fascinated with history, and Ed puts together a pretty compelling story that I'm looking forward to hearing more about here, and getting to participate in spreading the word and learning more and meeting and relating with other people who consider this to be worthy of attention and kind of community and collaboration. So thank you, Mr. Dahl.
All right, thank you, Tony. Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit again. I think it's your Wi-Fi. But anyway, I want to thank Tony
for
because
having
he's
me on.
Tony is
Did that all
particularly
come
responsible. Tony is particularly responsible for sort of kicking me out of my funk of late. I haven't been writing or doing much podcasting, and I met Tony at a retreat, and he's really encouraging me. They've got an event space. Him and his girlfriend have Alexandra have started up an event space called the Woodlark Refuge for artists and spirituality, and so we've been having some great events over there, and they've been encouraging me. That whole crowd's been encouraging me to get this going. So I appreciate that. And I'm delighted to talk to Lisa too, because she actually has, an educational degree in this stuff, and she's not just, a faux scholar, pretend scholar. I am actually a pretty educated guy myself, but not on this stuff. I work in, it's a little bit background about myself. I work as an environmentalist. I work in clean energy, and I had come around more than 10 years ago. To the ideas of circularity and putting ecosystems first in terms of resolving our environmental issues and climate change and all this stuff. So even though I work on the technology, I don't actually think the technology is going to save us at all. I think, we need to work with Mother Nature, and we need to work with the circularity of Mother Nature to resolve our environmental problems. Actually, I think our problems are very solvable if we had the right mindset. But I stumbled into the goddess in the Bible when I was working in the cannabis industry for a couple of years. I kind of took a career detour for a while. And I've always been interested in cannabis history, both the fiber and the drugs, because they go all the way back to like the Neolithic. And they have sort of a continuous thread all the way through history. And I wanted to write something about it, something that hadn't been written yet. And I was looking at cannabis in the Bible because I learned from my friend Chris Bennett, who's written a bunch of books on cannabis history. He pointed out that to me anyway, that cannabis is mentioned 5 times in the Old Testament, but it's mistranslated, so we don't see it. It's listed as a different plant, as calamus, or as either aromatic cane. And the first mentioned, the most important one, is that it's an ingredient in Moses' holy anointing oil, which is a recipe given by God directly to Moses to anoint all the sacred objects in the tabernacle and in the temple, and anoint the kings and high priests. So it's very important. And then but it gets mistranslated, so we don't see it there, and it obviously not part of the tradition now. So the original thesis of my book was that I was going to figure out where in the historical record that the Israelites had thrown the cannabis out, and it shifted those traditions. That was the hypothesis that I was starting to dig in. And as I got into that research, I started hearing about Asherah in the Old Testament. Now, I'd grown up in church, and I went to church all the way through high school, and my parents weren't super religious, but we went to church, and I'd never heard anything about a mother of God or a wife of God or any of this stuff, or this character Asherah at all. And I was fascinated because all the scholars were saying she was the wife of God. And that just kind of boggled my mind. How can God have a wife? This doesn't make any sense. Like, God is omnipotent. There's no room for him to have a wife. So this really bothered me for a long time. It really kind of hurt my brain as to like how to like even make sense of it. But I developed my thesis to be like, all right, they probably got rid of this mother goddess at the same time they got rid of the cannabis, which turned out to be totally true. They're all wrapped up together. And so then the book started out as cannabis in the Bible, and then it became cannabis and the goddess in the Bible. and then it just became goddess in the Bible with cannabis kind of as a increasingly smaller and smaller character. So there's a couple of chapters about cannabis, but it's not the main part of the book, even though that was my entryway into it. And I've just been going down this rabbit hole ever since of trying to make sense of these goddesses and where they and how we can make sense of them in our era, in our world. So I was very influenced by Native Americans to make sense of it. That was my first key, that it was like Mother Earth and Sky Father, which is the same thing the Native Americans say. They say we have the same God as you. They talking to the colonists back in the day, the Christian missionaries. They were saying, the Native Americans were saying that they had the same God. But of course, the Christians said, no, it's not the same God. But the big difference is that they've also got Earth Mother. The Native Americans also have Earth Mother, while the Christians do not. And that was my first clue as to what was going on. And then secondly, I learned from the Native Americans that they have tribal matriarchal families and a matriarchal social structure. And that becomes like actually a really critical part of the backstory of the Israelites, is the transition from the 12 tribes that were matriarchal, I came to learn, like the other Bronze Age cultures, and they're transitioning to patriarchy. As they go from tribes to kingship, they go from matriarchy to patriarchy, and that's when they get rid of the goddesses historically. And so the Native Americans were the first clue. But then secondly, I've been very influenced by Hinduism all my life because of family background and my mother and stuff. My parents had lived in India. They adopted my sister. I have an Indian sister. And I grew up in a house just full of, my mom had a store where she imported stuff from India, mainly women's clothing, but just like stuff in general, gifts and things. So I grew up in a house just full of like Indian art and Indian books. So I was always exposed to it, even though I didn't really know anything about it per se until I was an adult. But I was very exposed to the idea that there was this very wild and woolly culture, very wild and woolly religion over there in India that the Christians did not approve of. I knew that much. I knew they believed in reincarnation. I knew they were polytheistic, or, apparently polytheistic. I come to understand this not really now. They were wild, kind of unbridled. But it was ultimately digging into these goddesses and the Shakti traditions from the Hindu perspective is where I was able to really put together the theology behind what's happening in the Bible. And that's really going to be where I'm going to make my case, is that what the biblical writers, part of my argument is that it's a cross-cultural, the mother goddess is cross-cultural, and we can totally map modern day Hindu, Indian traditions around Shakti, and we can map them across culture. We can take, when you see the common symbols, which we'll get into, you can map that across cultures, because it's ultimately about Mother Earth and the cycle of life and the cycle of creation and destruction. And that's universal. And so you can map it across cultures all the way back to ancient Egypt. And so that's really my argument, is that this divorce is happening is an exercise for the biblical writers to get rid of Shakti and all, for all intents and purposes, to get rid of Isis. And is an equivalent argument, because back then they were talking about Isis from Egypt, but in the modern parlance, we're talking about Shakti. And so they're getting rid of Shakti, and they're actually literally smashing the symbols that are, the bronze serpent and the snake and all this stuff. All these symbols that are made bad in the Bible are, integral parts of these goddess traditions. And there's just so much detail and so much stories. There's all these stories of where the goddesses are mentioned. There's stories about the priestesses. Another big thing, the priestesses in the Old Testament are translated as temple prostitutes. Like, that's what they're called. When you read them in English, the Bible in English, it talks about temple prostitutes, and they have laws, and Deuteronomy says your daughter will not be a temple prostitute. Well, when you read the word in Hebrew, it's Kadesha. And the word Kadesha translates as the holy ones. And so you've got the holy ones translated as temple prostitutes. And it really, that alone, once I learned that detail, really shook my whole understanding of the whole Bible, that there's really just something very, very different going on here than we were ever taught in church. There's a whole hidden story here that's been kept from us. How these priests are the holy ones. I mean, come on. So there's a lot going on, and a million stories. And my thesis is that the biblical writers are doing some stuff very intentionally, where they're mentioning the goddesses and mentioning the priestesses just enough to denounce them. They never give them the full story of what it's all about. They just mention them just enough to insult them, to knock them down, tear them down, burn them at the stake, so to speak, but never let them speak for themselves. So there's a bunch of women in the Old Testament that are being denounced, but never get to speak for themselves and never get to have their own voice. And that's part of what I want to dig into is like, who are the character? Who are these women? You know, like Miriam, Moses' sister, is like a classic. She was a prophetess. God speaks to her directly. She gets like summarily cut out of the story and never really gets to speak for herself. So I don't know. I'll pause for a moment. Maybe Lisa, you want to have something to say?
So, you know, I get angry about all of this stuff myself. And I just, you know, it's so interesting to me when you said, you know, what? God had a wife? What? How does that make sense? And I'm like, it makes more sense than God being a male and not having a wife and somehow having, you know, a son and so on like that. It just, nature always points to the truth. And the truth is that this third dimensional time space continuum in which we live is organized by math. And where all is one, if you go from one, then you have two, and that's like polarity, if you will, yin yang, Shiva Shakti, you know, God, goddess, male, female, what have you. And then from there, there's three, and so on. So, but if you look at the way nature works, women birth children. It takes a, you know, a male and a female to create life. And it only makes sense that there would be significant women. It only makes sense that if you think of, I mean, let's face it, we're humans, we're anthropomorphizing the divine, right? So if we're talking about God, what we're talking about, in my understanding, is really the thing that is, we are all one. That is energy. It's love, it's light, it's energy, but it's also darkness. You know, it's so many things. It's everything we can ever think of. So if you're going to talk about something so big that we can't even fathom it, of course, there would be women. Of course, there's going to be feminine energy that's going to play a role no matter what. And if we look at some of the absolute oldest creation stories that we know in human civilization, I believe the very oldest one is actually the Enuma Elish. Are you familiar with that, Ed?
Yeah. No, the Mesopotamian and the connection between the Mesopotamian creation stories is one of my important thesis for sure.
Yeah, but like the first mention of a female deity or a goddess is within the Enuma Elish, and that would be Tiamat.
Well, there's actually even an older one. There's the Sumerian one that predates Tiamat, where the goddess is.
Are you talking about Inanna?
Well, Inanna is part of the Sumerian traditions, but the mother goddess, the salt waters, because in the Mesopotamian myths, and this comes into the Bible, in Mesopotamian mythology, the source of everything was the great salt waters, and it was it's a mother, it's feminine, and she gives birth. And the oldest Sumerian ones, we don't even have the whole story. We just sort of like the scholars sort of been able to piece it together, but the metaphysics, but her name has escaped me at the moment, but she's very kind. The salt waters, and then she gives birth to the fresh waters, whose name is Enki, and then she also gives birth to the creator gods, who is On, who is the heavenly father, and Ki, who is the earth mother, and then there's also Enki, that's the fresh waters, and then Enlil is the original king of the gods for the Sumerians, and those are like the sort of like the high pantheon. Then you've also got Inanna and the sun and the moon. That's Venus. Inanna's Venus, then the sun and the moon, and then there's Jupiter. Like, anyway, you get those like the seven gods. I don't have all their names on top of my head, but the point is that there's a kind salt water, tradition that the Mother Goddess, she's kind and she's the salt waters. The Enuma Elish is the next culture. That's the Chaldeans or the Akkadians, I guess. They overthrew the Sumerians and they became the new leadership, and they were more patriarchal than the Sumerians. And so with every iteration, the goddesses get knocked down a peg. So the Enuma Elish, now the Great Salt Waters, is named Tiamat, and she's bad, and they're fighting Tiamat. And so, and Marduk is the new king of the gods, and the Enuma Elish is about how Marduk became king of the gods, and he splits Tiamat in half and makes the world from her corpse. And to me, the way I interpret that is they're talking about how they overturned the previous society and, reinterpreted their gods and reframed them for this new culture that's coming through, that's even more patriarchal and more brutal. But Tiamat still has a name. She's at least identified and she has a story. Even if she's a monster, she still has a name. But then the third iteration you get of this is Genesis 1 in the Bible. And there's many, many stories that we know they're coming from Mesopotamia, the Noah's Ark story in particular, where we also have three iterations. You have a Sumerian version, you have a Babylonian version that's in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then you have a third version that's in the Bible. Same story, just different names. So we know that there's these connections there. So in the third version of the creation, in Genesis 1, the waters are there, but they take her name away. So God, in the very opening lines of the Bible, God created the heaven and the earth, and the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the deep, I'm forgetting, but the surface of God hovered over the surface of the deep waters. That's Genesis 1:2. But the waters don't have a name. So God created the heaven and the earth. He did not create those waters. We can pull up the text. God did not create the waters in Genesis 1. He's hovering over them. And they repeats the word surface twice, is making it very clear that God is separate from those waters. He is not the same as those waters. He's separate from them. The Spirit of God is hovering over the surface of the deep waters. And the word deep is the Hebrew word tehom, which the scholars say is directly related to Tiamat. Like that they took the name from Tiamat, but then they're like taking her name away. They use the word, but they don't like make it a name. So like they're taking her name away. And this is part of my argument of the whole elaborate exercise of how they're in one story after another, they're taking away the name and taking away the traditions, and starts with the opening line of the Bible. It starts with the opening line where the waters are identified just enough to like draw the connection for the, contemporary audience of the day, but they're very intentionally taking her name away. So it's just Yahweh, or it's actually Elohim in that story, who's doing the creation all by himself. And it's an inversion of the Mesopotamian, and they're not plagiarizing it, they're responding to it. And they're intentionally changing it to create a new paradigm, a new cultural paradigm, a new framework. Hold on one second. Sorry, I had to get my dogs out. So the Enuma Elish is really that opening line of Genesis. I want to do one of the topics for one of the episodes of this will be the two creation stories. So that's one, is talking about how they're taking the name away in Genesis 1, and then the Garden of Eden story, which is obviously a separate story written centuries apart by a totally different group of people, totally different. It's not one story. I know, and evangelicals will try and make it into one big story. They're clearly two distinct stories. So the Garden of Eden story, I say, is totally about Asherah, the Kadesha priestesses. Eve represents all those traditions. The serpent, the sacred plants, the garden, all of this stuff is Mother Goddess traditions, and all the nature-based agricultural traditions. And in every instance, they're making them bad. The serpent is very, very important in Mother Goddess tradition. She's like a critically important symbol. It represents circularity. It represents the shedding of the skin, represents a new life.
Life force energy. Mm-hmm.
The earth energy. Actually, I'd love to hear what you have to say about the serpent. We don't have you want to talk about that for a moment? You have some scholarly, probably, insight.
Well, in feminist reinterpretations of some of these stories, right? Because most of this has been written by men and edited by men over, thousands of years. we understand that within those two creation stories, in the first one, God makes man and woman from the earth. He makes them equal, right? And then that's where the idea of like Adam's first wife comes in as Lilith. And so Lilith ultimately also becomes like cast out of Eden and demonized because that she would not, quote, lie beneath Adam, meaning she would not subjugate herself to him. Like if he was to assert himself as being more dominant or in charge of the important one, she was like, no, we're equal, you and I. We were made from this earth. That's actually what the name Adam means, is to be made of the earth. But when she's like, I'm not going to do this, then essentially she's like, I'm out of here. I'm not going to do this with you. Of course, she becomes demonized and everything like that. But when Eve comes into play, and of course, how is God making Eve out of Adam's rib? That's like trying to make it like he gave birth, right?
Totally.
Which is BS. But anyway, when the serpent comes into the garden and speaks to Eve, there are some who say that serpent is actually Lilith being like, yo, sister, they're duping you. Eat from this apple. You're going to figure things out, right? And, apples, when you cut them horizontally, is that sagittal? Anyway, when you cut them horizontally and you open them up, there's a pentacle on the inside. And that's associated with animism and witchcraft and goddess work and that sort of thing. So everything in that garden is, you're right, like very feminine. It's the wisdom, like women are the wisdom keepers. Women have historically been the ones that we hold the wisdom, and in part because we have that capacity to create life and give birth. So I think, I love this idea that serpent came into Eden to have this conversation with Eve and be like, you don't have to put up with this, right? You don't have to put up with this. But I do not believe also that, and I think I mentioned this to you when we met before, Ed, but I don't believe that, quote, original sin is what it's been made out to be. Because
I don't think the story's about sin at all. That's St. Augustine came up with that idea in like the 3rd century.
Right. But if there truly was a, quote, original sin, it is that the masculine turned its back on the feminine. And I think that's where everything went wrong and has been going wrong for such a very long time. And you can see how those kind of themes are even almost like been like dredged up and are being used even more and politically at this time as well.
Yeah, there's a lot to say on the serpent. Of course, it doesn't actually say apple in the Bible. It says forbidden fruit. And I've got a whole thing on that, but we'll get to that.
Okay. Oh, well, I can't wait to get to that part. I want to know what you think
so
it is.
Rosalie joined us.
Pomegranate.
I want to say, Rosalie, if you want to say hi, or you can stay quiet if you want. But I didn't see her lurking there for a moment. It was hidden on my screen.
Is she coming on?
Rosalie,
let's see.
Hi, Rosalie.
I'm trying to get. It's okay. I didn't mean to be lurking, and now I can't see myself. But it's all good. I'm enjoying this. And hi, Lisa.
Hi.
So yeah, it's good. Carry on,
right.
and I'll keep lurking.
All right. So So yeah, oh yeah. So the serpent, he never lies to Eve. He never, he says, if you eat the fruit, your mind will be expanded, and that's what happens. And meanwhile, God says, if you go with the serpent, you will get nothing but death. But that's actually true, because it's Goddess story. Goddess traditions are all about the cycle of life, and so they do focus on death. We got Kali right behind us. Life and death are balanced out, and the Goddess traditions totally ruminate on death and focus on death and teach you to deal with death, so that you know how to live in this life and not be afraid of dying. And so that's not wrong either, that if you go with the serpent, you'll get death, because that's just acknowledging reality. And these are fundamentally cycle of life traditions. And one of the things that happens when we go to all, the monotheism, is that we get focused on this linear life where it's a one-way ticket just to heaven or hell. And there's no rebound, there's no coming back around again. And then everyone's terrified of dying, because everyone's, pretty damn sure they're going to go to hell, because we're all a bunch of sinners, right? So everyone's terrified, and we have a culture that breeds the fear of death, which is not necessarily typical, because other cultures have totally different attitudes about death. And you look at the Muslims today, and these jihadi types, and they clearly have a very different attitude. But not even to go there, indigenous peoples have all sorts of different attitudes about death. But Christians and in the West, we are terrified of dying. And you look at hospitals and stuff where they do everything possible to keep people on this plane, long past their expiration date. And it's probably torturous for some souls, So
Absolutely. Well, death in many ways also is a symbol of things, right? Because of those cycles of, life, death, and rebirth. I mean, that cycle occurs on the daily, right? With, daylight and nighttime and so on, the sun rising, setting, the moon. So we've got the monthly cycle with the moon. We've got the yearly cycle with the seasons. But you've got that tapestry behind you of Kali. Kali, part of her, where she comes in with regards to death also is death of the ego, or letting go of things, which again, ties back in with the idea of the serpent or the snake, the letting go, the shedding. I think that's really a practice. It's a constant practice. It's a constant acknowledgement that everything is always in this cycle of transformation, life, death, and rebirth, life, death, and rebirth, life, death, and rebirth. And if more people understood it in that way, they might not be also quite so afraid of it. But if you could imagine, if nothing and no one ever died on this earth, can you imagine how horrible that would be? Right? It would be overcrowded. There'd be, people suffering and rot and that sort of thing, but they would maybe still be alive. It would be even more chaotic. It would be crowded. It wouldn't be the same. But also, I think death is the great equalizer that gives meaning to life. And because we know that death is, inevitable, it means that things are more precious. It means that life is more precious. It places more meaning on life, because life is so ephemeral. And because of that understanding, I think that if death didn't exist, I'm not sure that love would exist either, because we understand things as being, precious or sacred, and I think that's part of where the death thing comes in too, that people maybe don't quite understand. And I mean, love does live on beyond death too, which is really very beautiful.
Yeah, that's all great stuff. I'd like to, I'm not going to have a real long episode tonight. I did want to give some ideas about how I've come to make sense of like the metaphysics of the mother and how she relates to the father, and how I've been able to take the Shiva Shakti framework and apply it to the biblical God. And so basically, I believe God is real. And I think it's the same. We've been talking about the same God for the last 50,000 years in all of our religions. And there's one high God, but then also he has like these various sons that come down and are the various gods of our various worlds. But the mother, so the God, by any definition, whether you believe in God or not, by any definition, God is immaterial. You can't touch God. You can't see God. God is like consciousness or ideas. You can't touch an idea. You can't quantify an idea. So I view God as the source of all consciousness, the source of all ideas, the source of all forms. This is a sort of Platonic philosophy, or how Vishnu is. But the mother, what is the mother? The mother is the material world. She is the totality of the material world. And in fact, the word mother and the word matter are the same word. They have the same Latin root, mater, which is the title for Cybele, one of the great mother goddesses of the Roman era, was called Magna Mater, Great Mother. That's where we get the word material. The word mother is the material world, and she is inherently circular. Circularity is intrinsic. And so before the universe was formed, so according to the Hindus, Shiva and Shakti are timeless and eternal. So they're neither created or destroyed. So imagine Shakti, she's the material world, but she's like a big hurricane. She's like spinning, chaotic, formless, but she is spinning. And in the middle of that, there's the eye, which is an empty space. And in the middle of that eye, you get Shiva, who is the axis. He is like a pillar of fire that goes all the way to eternity up and all the way to eternity down. And he is the axis, like the planetary axis that Shakti is spinning around. So she is all the mass and energy and physics, and he is that empty space where consciousness is and ideas come from. And then the first God, the high God, emerges out of those waters. And so this is why you have the waters as this cosmic starting point in a bunch of religions. It's there in ancient Egypt, where Ra comes out of the chaotic waters. It's there in Hinduism, where Vishnu comes out of. They call it, for the Hindus, those waters are Shakti. That's what they call it. That's what they say. So in all these religions, we already talked about the waters. This motif repeats cross-culturally over and over again because it makes sense. It makes sense that the formless, chaotic waters at the very beginning are like just spinning around like crazy. And so you get this. So the I and the O, and it's like a quasar or a planetary axis or a gyroscope, or this is, if you guys can see this on camera, this is a lingam and yoni that I got in India. So this is Shiva, and this is Shakti. This is the it is phallic. This is the lingam.
Shiva lingam.
And so, so male and female and all of it. And imagine this is like a hurricane with an empty space in the middle, and that this is like an axis that goes all the way up and all the way down, and it's spinning around. And like that's what Shiva Shakti is. And then they've got
she is more the horizontal.
She's the horizontal, exactly, yeah. And then you've got the bronze serpent, which again is another repeating motif. You got the 7-headed dragon or a serpent that is there at creation. It's called Leviathan in the Bible. But all these traditions, Ra fights him off in Egypt, and you've got this 7, and it's there in Hinduism. So you get, and it's all got different names and all these different traditions, but it's always there where it's like this pet of the mother goddess. I'm not really even sure how they characterize the 7-headed dragon, but it's there across culture. Then in the Bible, they smash the bronze serpent in their reforms. And that's one of the things that they do. We'll get to that part where they smash the bronze serpent that one of the reformer kings, Hezekiah, does. They're smashing this same bronze serpent right here because they're smashing the symbols of the mother goddess. They're putting them out of business. So anyway, mind and matter, body and soul, consciousness and material world. That's the framework. And I view it as like a fabric, the fabric of reality. The warp and weft threads interconnected together. Mind, material and immaterial, mind and matter. Like that's how I see it. So consciousness and energy. And so everything that like the modern day atheist scientist is just looking at the world through a purely materialist lens, I believe they're going to come to recognize that if you turn the light of spirituality onto it, they're talking about the mother. That all the mass and physics and energy we talk about in the science class is actually, when they talk about the laws of nature, they're talking about the laws of Mother Nature, and they're characterizing the way the mother works. And she has power and authority of her own because she is creation and destruction. So whatever God creates, she is ultimately going to destroy. That makes her the most powerful piece on the chessboard in the pagan pantheon, where you've got a Kali type character, which is again cross-cultural, same character, multiple societies have the same character. She's the most powerful one on the chessboard because she has the power to destroy all of God's creation. And again, that's if your theological project is to create an omnipotent God with no rival, you can't have Kali running around in your society. You've got to get rid of the priestesses and the traditions and the symbolism and everything, because she has power and authority of her own. And she has power that God can't contradict. Anything God creates, she will ultimately destroy someday. So that's kind of how I see it. And then you get the triple goddess motif of Mother, Maiden, Death, which is, and then all those goddesses, that's the other part of it, is that all the goddesses are all fractions of one super goddess. Like when you shine a light through a prism and it refracts in a bunch of different colors, that's what all the goddesses. Hinduism is very explicit about this, but so was the Isis traditions from Egypt are very explicit. All goddesses are Isis. Isis is the super goddess, and all the other goddesses
she's almost like essentially the equivalent to Shakti, like that primordial feminine. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Isis in the Roman era, I make this argument explicitly, that the Roman era Isis, after they go through the city of Alexandria and the religion gets like updated, she was totally the super goddess of the Roman world. And she has all the power, and she was the most popular deity in the Roman Empire. So it was not like it was some obscure thing. She was the most popular deity. And so they have a trinity of Mother, Father, Son. The Romans did, or the Isis traditions do. And that was competing with the trinity of Father, Son, Holy Ghost. And like in those first centuries of Christianity, when they were still trying to figure out the Orthodox traditions, and the Gnostics were running around, you had all these different traditions running around Jesus. For 300 years, Christianity was unformed. This would have been a very real debate. Father, Son, Holy Ghost versus Mother, Father, Son. And frankly, I think, having grown up very dissatisfied with my Christian experience, that putting the mother back in the equation is just so much better and so much, it just makes it all so much more sense. And you can keep Jesus. That's the beauty of it, is if you're an open-minded Christian, you can put the mother back in the Trinity without missing a beat, without contradicting the Gospels, because she's already in the traditions. She raised Jesus. I've got a whole thing on this. The women weren't just witnesses to the resurrection, Mary Magdalene and the three Marys. Again, the three Marys. They weren't just witnesses to the resurrection. They were fully responsible for it. They're the ones who dealt with Jesus. They were the ones with him. I got a whole thing on that. That'll be a whole episode. So the Virgin Mary, the Queen of Heaven, the Virgin Mother of God, she's already part of the traditions. Many of the cathedrals all over Europe were goddess temples that they simply renamed them. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus is buried in Jerusalem, that was a Venus temple. And they just like took it over, said, oh, we're making the Church of the Holy Sepulchre now. Notre Dame in Paris was a temple of Isis. All over Europe, the Hagia Sophia, all over. Dozens of them were goddess temples. Or you have the Black Madonna. You have Isis nursing baby Horus, which is the exact iconography that's used for Madonna and Jesus. They literally just took the same statue and changed the name on it. So the mother is totally there in the Christian traditions. It's just a matter of like opening the closet door and letting her out and pulling the burqa off her and, letting her shine, because right now she's like locked in the closet. She's still around. She wasn't, disappeared. She's just been hidden from view by like violence, really, with violence and control and manipulation.
Don't forget, as I said in the chat, today is Mary Magdalene's feast day.
Oh, there we go.
And, Jesus. I like to refer to him as Yeshua because to me that makes him a real human person, somebody relatable. He was married. He had a consort. She was a priestess. They taught together. They followed a lot of Gnosticism and Gnostic principles and beliefs. So, and then of course they try to like rub her out. She was the first apostle. She was the first apostle. She was meant to be the one to carry on the traditions and the teachings once Yeshua was gone. But of course they rubbed her out. They try to erase her. They called her a whore. Like that's always the thing, calling a woman a whore. Like
Yeah, they do it over and over and over again.
Yeah, and it's such BS. Like who cares? Who cares?
Well, I'm gonna debate you on whether they're married or not. I actually think that they're chaste.
There's a lot of back and forth about that, but I mean, she went on to have a child. Hello, at least one. Yeah, Sarah. Do you know about Sarah? Anyway, so the thing is, like, I don't know. I just personally never could get on board or understand or make any sense of Christian religion. My little bit of exposure as a child, like none of it made any sense whatsoever. And as a person in a female body, to go into a church and not see anything like myself represented there, all the pictures of men, like where's the divinity in that?
Yeah, no, I as I was saying, I got a lot of Sunday school growing up, and it never made any sense to me either. And I was raised Protestant in a sort of a mainstream Protestant church where we were not evangelicals. I'm actually very thankful I was taught this. We were not evangelicals. I was taught we don't read the Bible that way. We don't read the Bible literally, like that. That's really dumb. Like we're not Bible thumpers, and we're not going to read the Bible like the Bible thumpers because that's just idiotic. The Bible clearly contradicts itself all over the place, so let's not do that. We're not going to read it literally. It's symbolic wisdom literature, and even as a child, I was taught it's symbolic wisdom literature to be interpreted and ruminated on, to like try and mine it for its moral teachings, but not to read it literally. Like we're trying to like figure out the date of like Jesus walked on water or something. I mean, these are stories. So I'm very appreciative that I was taught to read the Bible that way in Sunday school as a child.
You mean critical thinking?
Yeah, I did go to a church in Washington, D.C., which like full of educated government types. We were not, it was definitely full of educated government people in Georgetown Presbyterian, this very old church in D.C. But then I ended up going to Catholic high school just by chance. So then I was getting church 6 days a week, and I was getting the Catholics, and the Catholics absolutely blew my mind, like, and not in a good way, because it was like, they also don't read the Bible literally, but their whole thing is that we already read the Bible. We already interpreted it. We'll tell you what to think. You repeat after me. And it was like, they did not want questions. Like theology classes in my Catholic high school were like, literally repeat after me. This is how it is. We already figured it out. It's not for you to think about it. Don't ask questions. And I was I about fell out of my chair, man. And I couldn't stop asking questions. And then they would like get mad at me. Even the students got mad at me. And then when I graduated high school, I was like, I'm done with all this. Like, this is enough. I'm not a Christian anymore. But I'd already gone into the psychedelic scene, and I'd already sort of been green pilled with cannabis and hemp stuff. And I was already going down. I never became an atheist. I started doing, like, as I was saying, I was already introduced to Eastern tradition. So I started reading like Hermann Hesse and other people that were like East meets West, mystical philosophy, kind of German existentialists and 19th century romanticists and that kind of thing, where they were breaking free of Christianity, but they weren't dropping their mysticism. And that always attracted me, and comparative religion always attracted me. So yeah, I never became an atheist when I left the church. I just started doing things different.
God.
Anyone else want
Bless.
to say something?
I was going to say earlier the dynamics you're describing about the goddess in the closet and kept her away with violence sounds a lot like the personal journeys a lot of us go through with shadow selves, inner selves, exiling selves due to trauma, you know, and finding your way back to healing and being a fully integrated self. And so it's just interesting the kind of allegory of what you're describing here with Christian religion, with goddess and God religion, that it's got this kind of parallel to our own, you know, journeys and inner struggles to find that which has been banished, bring it to the light to be healed, allow it to be a source of creation and love instead of control and fear. And all that just told existentially and getting to be on here and talk with you all about goddess history. So it seems like anybody who's interested in exploring metaphysical, metaphorical topics that'll help their own personal trauma healing journey should join in with the Goddess Bible Study every Tuesday, 7 p.m. Same bat time, same bat place, same bat crazy goddess people.
I was going to say it's also very much an allegory of abusive marriages, and you see the pattern in human abusive marriages and men abusing their wives for centuries, right? So like that's very clear. Rosalie, did you want to say something? You're muted.
On mute.
You're muted. Rosalie, you're muted.
This is my bouquet of flowers for Magdalene's feast day and for thinking about Oshun, another goddess that I identify with. And I wanted to thank you. And I could relate to the thing about I grew up in Catholic school and raised my kids Catholic, and I was married to a Catholic. And I remember asking him like why we're doing this. And he said, you know, I don't need to answer why, it's just cause. And so that is just wild that you mentioned that. That definitely rang true. And as far as this shadow that we all individually and collectively deal with the shadows, the sense I get is if we take the mother out of the shadow and put her back into the trilogy, that maybe we'll all have some relief. And it is this perpetually men turning their backs on women and then women turning their backs on women. It's the perpetuating of the turning backs on women, whether it's men turning backs on women and women turning back on women. And so I thank you for bringing this topic up, because again, I believe that by bringing the goddess back into the forefront, we'll all experience relief.
Yeah, that's great. And you're speaking to like matriarchal cultures, because the whole backbone of matriarchies was that the women stuck together. And
yes.
So you track your bloodlines to the mothers, first of all. So that means you're not controlling the women's sex lives. So that's why we know it's the default of humanity, because patriarchy requires all this control and domination of the women so you know who the father is. But in a matriarchal cultures, it's not they don't understand the biology. They're just not tracking the men because they're not trying to control the women. But also the women are staying together like in their homes. So when you have a marriage, in a matriarchal marriage, the man goes and lives with the woman's family, and the women are staying together with their sisters and aunties and cousins and grandmas, and they're raising the babies collectively. And then some women like hanging out with the babies, but other women are like, you do it, and I'm going to go be a warrior or whatever. And so the women, it's like a labor union for women. And then if it's an unhappy marriage, they kick the man out, he goes packing, but the girls stay together. They don't just tend the hearth and home, they own the hearth and home, and all the wealth passes through the women. But as we switch into patriarchy and these monogamous marriages where women are controlled, then by splitting the women apart, it pits women against each other. So eventually in historical terms, still in the ancient world, but at a certain point, the women's spirits the matriarchies are all broken, the spirits are all broken, and the women get locked into to having their one man, and they all become like jealous and fighting amongst each other. And then the women enforce the slut shaming more than the men ever do. But
Like
that's
the
that's
Real
part of the story
Housewives of the Old Testament, Ed.
What's that?
It's like the Real Housewives of the Old Testament.
Totally. But
Well-
you see, in the older parts, like it's still a matriarchy. In the older parts of the Old Testament, it's still matriarchal.
Oh, okay.
I
Well,
mean-
after that,
I mean-
then the New Testament. I'm staying corrected.
I mean, I will say that I'm very proud to be a part of this feminine energy rising, as I know Lisa is, and as and what that means to me is being part of these growing women wisdom circles, goddess gathering, and the revival of tantrika, where we reclaim our sexuality and polyamory and all of that. So that gives me hope that there is a movement, there is a wave, there is a current, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's really the family is the building block of society, and when society went from matriarchal cultures to patriarchal cultures, and it plays out over many centuries, it dramatically changes the whole tone and tenor of how people relate to one another. The material conditions might not change, the same food, same cities and everything, all that stays the same, but the cultural tone and attitudes amongst one another, the relationships is totally different. And certainly the women have all manner of freedom that they lose later on.
And,
But
and
family
recognizing
unit,
that.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The family unit of a man and his wife and kids or whatever, that's a consumer unit. That's very capitalistic also. And, how many of us are have tried to do that or try to, force ourselves into those narratives because that's what we've been told since before we were ever born and indoctrinated into. And that's the be all end all, and Disney, shoves it down our throat. And then we all get into this situations and we're like, this is it? Really? Well,
I do the whole wife and kids thing, and I've got, I'm divorced, I got an ex, and it's hard, man. It's hard to keep it together. You see people in unhappy marriages all over the place, man. It's tough.
Right. It's underwhelming, and it's really meant to create this consumer unit, and it's also meant to put people in these neat little boxes and that fit with the narratives of these monotheistic patriarchal religions. And I really think that ties that ties really big time into capitalism. I don't think capitalism probably would have existed were it not for monotheistic patriarchal religion.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely
Daniel Greenberg likes to say the root of the term capitalism is cattleism and trading the cattle. And I don't wish to call the discussion short, Edric, but I will have to retire to the room for dining with my friends here soon. And before I did, though, I wanted to sign off with a gratitude to you and a question. So next week you'll be highlighting a specific goddess that we'll
so next week, so I think
this
this is a good time to wrap it up. We've been on for an hour, and I think this is great. I appreciate everybody for showing up. Yeah, so next week, I think we should start with Genesis. Let's just start with Genesis 1 and start going through. We can jump around. We don't have to go through the whole Bible in order, but like
crisscross, jump up.
I was just thinking that too.
But,
Jump around.
Starting in Genesis
House
is probably
of
a good
Pain.
place to start as any.
All right, that sounds like a plan.
And I'm going to be traveling next week, so I reserve the right, if my tech is not up to speed when I'm on the road, to postpone next week. But I'm going to try and make it happen. But I will be on the same laptop, but I will be remote, and I won't have all the same nice gear. But yeah, trying to make it every Tuesday at 7. I do want to make this a regular thing. Totally looking for help from anybody that wants to help me on social
have
media
fun with
or
it.
anything like that. I'm terrible at all that stuff. But thank you, Tony. And,
Bye.
I can stick around for a little while, but I think we can wrap it up, though. Whatever you guys want to do.
All right. Well, no, this is a great beginning, and I love the idea of having certain topics as we go, so that if we want to do homework ahead of time or
Yeah.
bring some things in like to talk
All right,
about.
yeah.
And
So, yeah,
to
the
share.
idea is I'm going to have something prepared. As I was saying, I've got this whole book outlined, so I've got the material ready to go. I can prepare like a couple slides. The idea is like prepare something for like 15 minutes ish, and then have the rest of it for discussion. So pick a Bible story or two, read through them in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then talk. That's kind of what the format I want to have.
But will you guide us as to what you want to talk about? I think
Yeah,
that would be
I'll lead it.
yeah.
I'll lead the topic and present. Here's my material. Here's my evidence, and I'll put it up on the group chat ahead of time so people know what's coming. But yeah, Genesis 1 and 2, the Garden of Eden and the Genesis 1 story next week. There should be plenty to talk about.
Okay, great. It's good to see you, Rosalie.
Do you guys know each other?
Yes, we
Okay.
have a little brief history. Yeah. So
All right,
Yeah,
great.
I mean, like that was such a long time ago.
I know that was in the beginning. That was when I first left the Matrix.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Anyway, it was so beautiful to see you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Lisa.
Thank
Thank
you. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.